And Trump has been reluctant to put pressure on Russia. And that's a problem because it makes Trump look weak. He's unhappy that Zelenskyy points out the weaknesses of Trump's policy. Trump's complaint about Zelenskyy is he talks too much. That Russia's demanding too much. Essentially, the surrender of Ukrainian sovereignty.
This is an exclusive conversation with Ambassador John Herbst. He is a Senior Director of the Atlantic Council, the Eurasia Center of the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. You are in Odessa in Ukraine as we speak. We are going to discuss the Russia-Ukraine war, but before that, if you could just describe what's happening in Odessa, how are things, what's the situation on the ground, sir?
Well, there have been, certainly over the past month and a half or so, as their effort by the Trump team to have negotiated a ceasefire, savage Russian air attacks using Iranian drones and missiles from Russia and from North Korea. And Odessa has been one of the principal targets. So civilians have died in recent days, children. But last night, while there was an air raid, there was not much incoming. But and again, the last few days, dreadful, absolutely dreadful. But the Ukrainians here are not going to submit to Russian terror because they know that being occupied Russia is far worse than being bombarded by Russia.
Right. We'll talk about the details of where the peace deal is headed, so on and so forth. But the latest, the fact that there was a neutral venue that was being chosen, Russia has been hesitant about Vatican. What's your take on the United States of America mediating peace between Russia and Ukraine, which could be rather compromised for Ukraine?
It's a little bit complicated. President Trump made clear, even during our presidential election last year, after he was elected, and after he became president for the second time, that he wanted to achieve an end to the fighting, a durable end to the fighting, that required significant compromises from both Ukraine and Russia. And President Zelenskyy of Ukraine has demonstrated multiple times since certainly March 18, when he agreed to a general ceasefire, that he's willing to make serious compromises. And the Kremlin has made clear multiple times it is unwilling to make any serious compromises. President Trump had said multiple times that he's going to offer ideas for a reasonable peace, a durable peace, and if one or both of the sides refuse those terms, he would put major pressure on them. Ukraine's accepted the terms, although despite that, Trump put some pressure, serious pressure on Ukraine back in early March. Russia has refused to make any compromises, and Trump has been reluctant to put pressure on Russia. And that's a problem because it makes Trump look weak. And also, Trump is now running into some criticism from his own supporters for looking weak in connection with a very aggressive Kremlin.
Also, he wanted the entire peace be brought about within 24 hours. That was not to be a realization much later, that it takes much longer to bring about peace between two warring factions, particularly countries like Russia and Ukraine. Ambassador Herbst.
Again, I think Trump truly wants to see a permanent end to the fighting. He's come up with a proposal which is reasonable, albeit it would still leave, unfortunately, millions of Ukrainians under a very savage Russian occupation. But the Ukrainians have demonstrated a willingness to accept this if security measures that Trump himself has proposed become enacted, like the deployment of European troops to Ukraine, like major Western American arms flows to Ukraine, because that would prevent Russia from future aggression. And Ukraine is willing to accept it. But Putin does not want to annoy Trump, but he also refuses to accept Trump's ideas for peace. So he's trying to stall the negotiations. And some supporters of Trump, some friends of Trump, have recognized this. And they think that Trump has to fulfill his pledge to put serious pressure on the party that blocks an end to this war. And that party is certainly the Kremlin.
Ambassador Herbst, you've served in Ukraine. You know how difficult it has been in terms of relations with Russia, in and out. There have been pro-Russia governments as well in Kyiv. But the recent conversations and talks that we've seen between the United States of America and Russia and US and Ukraine, what are the red lines over here? What is it that you think Putin wants? Is it to have the areas that are under Russian control as part of Russia, or is it a complete surrender by Zelenskyy?
At a minimum, Putin wants political control of Ukraine. That need not involve annexation of the entire country, although Putin's made clear his intention to annex 4 oblasts as well as Crimea. And he's also stated that Odessa is a quote unquote Russian city, which of course is nonsense. And so that suggests he wants to annex Odessa too. But he wants to make sure that Zelenskyy is gone, that any government in Kyiv is going to fulfill Russian wishes, that Ukraine is forced to become a quote unquote neutral country without much of a military, which means Russia can renew aggression at any time. Those are his aims. And even members of Trump's team who have been very naive about Russian intentions have said recently that Moscow is asking for too much. I'm thinking in first instance of Vice President Vance, who said that 2+ weeks ago, that Russia is demanding too much, essentially the surrender of Ukrainian sovereignty.
Well, that's a very important point you make, but we are seeing President Trump quite frustrated with the fact that things are not moving the way he wants to. In fact, there has been a bitter to and fro between Kremlin and between President Trump himself. Words like crazy being used on public and social media platforms. But more importantly, despite all the frustration, why is President Trump unwilling to put the kind of pressure that needs to be put on President Putin?
Well, we have seen this, you might say, Trumpian instinct, Trump's instinct not to put pressure on Russia. And we've also seen, and this is very odd, President Trump has revived a very bad idea, a bad idea that was an Obama idea of resetting relations with Russia despite its aggressive policy, including towards the United States. And President Trump has revived another very bad idea that somehow American businesses could get rich from investing in Russia and selling to Russia, which never happened even during the 1990s when relations between Moscow and Washington were pretty good. So these naive ideas are still part of Trump's thinking. So that affects it. But again, Trump supporters in Congress, in the media, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, have very sharply criticized him for not putting pressure on Putin, for not fulfilling his sound promise to put pressure on the party blocking peace. For that reason, I think there is a chance Trump will move in the right direction. He does, I believe, honestly want an end to this war. And the only way he gets that is by making it clear to Putin that Putin will not be able to take more Ukrainian territory. So that means we have to send American arms and put American pressure in the form of sanctions on the Kremlin.
But Ambassador Herbst, President Trump is not a fan of Zelenskyy either. Were there critical mistakes or miscalculations by President Zelenskyy as well when it comes to the position he took on Ukraine, on NATO?
I think what you've said is true, but as observers in the Republican Party, conservative observers have pointed out, Trump's complaint about Zelenskyy is he talks too much. Or more specifically, Zelenskyy has said properly some of the naive positions taken by the Trump administration. So he gets mad at Zelenskyy for saying that. Whereas he has criticized Putin for his murderous policy in Ukraine, the murder of dozens of Ukrainian civilians as peace talks that Trump wants continue. But he's yet to take measures against Putin. So in the one case, he's unhappy that Zelenskyy points out the weaknesses of Trump's policy. On the other hand, while he says he's angry, he's not demonstrated that anger to achieve his own objective of establishing a durable peace. Now, I personally think Zelensky is making a mistake when he criticizes Trump, because that's not helpful for Zelensky to get the support from Washington
Absolutely.
that he needs. But that's not the same as committing aggression, blocking Trump's goal of achieving a stable peace, and savagely attacking Ukrainian civilians, which is what Putin is doing.
Are there red lines over here in the conversations that are taking place between U.S., Russia, U.S., Ukraine? Steve Witkoff traveling to both
Well,
and speaking to both sides. Are there red lines that have been set at all?
uh, sadly, Trump has laid down, let's say, not formally, but at least informally, red lines when he said he was going to punish the party that is blocking peace. Putin has crossed that red line. Yet Trump, while threatening to take action, has really not taken action. So that's a problem. That's a serious problem, including for the reputation of the president. And maybe I think as a result of that problem for Trump, he will eventually make good his intention to put pressure on the obstacle to peace. But he has not demonstrated his willingness yet to do that.
Right, Ambassador Herbst, also the fact that we are looking at conflicts in various parts of the world, and there are many questions that are being raised or could be raised. Now, India was questioned about its own position on the neutrality and also continuing to engage Russia in the past during Biden administration. But soon after Trump came, a lot of things changed. And for the time being, geopolitically, it seemed like they were on the right side of geopolitics.
Uh, Biden understood more or less, not clearly and not strongly, not decisively, that Moscow's aggression against Ukraine was dangerous for the United States because Putin, if he wins in Ukraine, is going to commit much larger provocations to the West, in the Baltic states, in Poland, maybe in Finland, Romania. And in Ukraine, Putin is facing a large country with a larger as Ukrainians. Uh, Biden kind of understood that, but sadly, Biden was weak. He was intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. Uh, Trump has criticized, yes, I'm hearing you now. Trump has criticized Biden's policy as weak, and Trump is right about that. And Trump has laid out again a an objective, which is a sound one, of establishing a permanent peace, and a method to achieve that permanent peace that is also sound. But he's been reluctant right now to fully implement his own ideas. He has moved a little bit in that direction, but not enough. Again, he's under some pressure, which is only growing, to do more. And I think his own reputation, his own desire to achieve fame as a peacemaker, will move him eventually in the right direction. I just don't know when.
As head of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, looking at the developments, looking at India's ties with these countries, what are your expectations when it comes to New Delhi?
I think that the Europeans continue to develop a stronger policy opposing Russian aggression in Ukraine, in a sense, following the game plan that Trump himself laid out of organizing a troop deployment to Ukraine. I think that Trump supporters in Congress and in the media will continue to make the case to President Trump that he needs to make good on his promise to establish that stable peace by putting pressure on the obstructionist party, Russia. And we will see more support for Ukraine from both Europe and the United States. If that happens, and I think it will be impossible for Putin to make more military gains in Ukraine, and he might be willing to accept that he can only occupy that part of Ukraine that is currently under his military's control. He cannot get more Ukrainian land. He cannot neutralize Ukraine as a country. He cannot demand that Zelenskyy step down. He cannot put a puppet into Bankova, the Ukrainian White House.
India, Ukraine also have historical ties, and so do the relations between India and Russia.
Right.
Here in Odessa, have you heard anything on what India's position has been and what is their understanding of it?
This has not come up yet. I'm on the first day of a 2-day conference. Maybe it'll come up tomorrow. I understand that historically there has been a close relationship between Moscow and New Delhi, going back to certainly the middle, if not earlier days of the Cold War. That continued after the Soviet Union fell apart. But of course, I know that India has watched with great concern the growing closeness of relations between Beijing and Moscow. And I suspect that the interests of India and the United States, the interests of India and Ukraine will grow ever closer because Putin is determined to develop a closer relationship with Beijing, which is not good for New Delhi.
Ambassador John Herbst, thank you so much for joining us here on the
Thank you. My pleasure.